Welcome, everyone. Uh, please do come forward with your questions in the chat box, and we'll try and get as many asked to Colin Bloom, who I'm delighted to have joining us today for this conversation about the government's engagement with faith groups. Colin, you are the government's faith engagement advisor. Can you tell us a bit about your role and how you came to be doing it?
Well, thank you, and it's very good to be with you. I'm sorry the minister isn't here, but so the review came about, or I was appointed just over a year ago, and I think and I'll say a bit about where the review is, what the review is for. But I think I was appointed because it is felt that at the time government needed to understand if it engaged with faith communities well enough, could it engage better, and because of the career that I'd previously had, I think they felt that I would be a good candidate for the role. And then, of course, along comes COVID, and has really brought faith leaders, people of faith, places of worship into government space and government into their space in a way that we would never have guessed a year ago could have ever happened. And I would imagine that there's been more faith engagement or more engagement between faith and government in the last 9 months, probably than in the previous, many years. So it's been it's serendipitous, I think, is the word I was hopelessly grasping for, to sort of say that these two came together in the way that they did.
And just to be clear, your background is as executive director of the Conservative Christian Fellowship and director of Christians in Politics. So you're someone who's been involved in politics as an activist, or as what's your involvement in politics been?
Well, I was a director of outreach for the Conservative Party, but before then I've been involved in, as you say, the Conservative Christian Fellowship and Christian in Politics, and a number of other faith-based organisations, but I'm independent. I'm independent of government. I don't speak for the government. My review will be fearless, I hope, and if I do my job right, Christopher, I think I'll upset just about everyone a little bit, and hopefully demonstrate the value that exists between in our faith communities, to make sure that they continue to thrive and prosper, particularly in a post-COVID world. I think this is going to be an interesting time for us all.
And just going back to the context of where this review came from, and you mentioned obviously the relationships that were forged during the lockdown between faith groups and the government. We know that faith groups, in many respects, mobilized during this period. We think of the Sikh Gurdwara, which turned itself into an emergency food provision outlet for NHS workers. We think of all the other faith groups that have worked hard. There's obviously also been some tensions between church leaders and government, particularly over restrictions of worship. Are the other tensions and the difficulties around lockdown between government and faith groups, is that the real driving force behind this review then?
No, the review and the terms of reference was set up, before COVID hit. As I say, it's just remarkable timing. But you're right to say that of course there has been tensions, but above that, I would say there has been just a tremendous amount of generosity and grace and understanding from faith leaders and from government ministers in the way that the two have interacted. And whilst I think there has been, of course, there's been a lot of disappointment, that disappointment is fully shared. I can say it's fully shared by Secretary of State, ministers, and others. And again, I don't speak for them, but I mean, if they were here, I'm sure they would say it was the hardest thing that they could do, to make recommendations to have places of worship restricted during COVID. The way that many imams and temple leaders and Gurdwara leaders and church leaders responded was genuinely amazing. And I think that government officials as well as politicians will be looking back at this as a time when that engagement, forged in the fire of all of the complexities and the pain of COVID, I think has brought them closer together.
So you obviously in charge of writing this review or presenting the recommendations of this review to the Secretary of State. Do you think that one of those recommendations might be the setting up of a special faith engagement office, similar to what we see in the US? Is that something that is on the table?
Well, certainly nothing's off the table, Christopher, in terms of what my recommendations might be. Interestingly, the APPG, for the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Faith and Society, led by the wonderful Stephen Timms, MP, produced a report recently, I think in the last week or so actually, which one of their recommendations was to have a faith commissioner. And I think there's a lot of merit to that argument. And the idea of having either an individual or an office at the centre of government that has a view of all of the complexities of faith, but not just individual faiths, but the intra-faith aspects. So what happens within Hindu communities or Sikh communities or Jewish communities or Muslim communities or Christian communities, the different complexities that go on in there. There's a lot to understand, and there's a lot to sort of for politicians and for public officials, government officials, to get their head around. So I think there is some merit to have a centre of excellence at the heart of government would be very useful. But as I say, the review's not written yet. I'm not going to give too much away in terms of what's in it, but that was a recommendation from a report from the APPG, and I say I think it certainly has some merit.
Okay, well, thank you for that, for the guidance. Just on another point about government and faith, we saw that in the summer, the Prime Minister asked Danny Kruger to do his own review. It was broader than just faith groups. It was to do with civic society groups. And in that recommendation, he said that government should invite the country's faith leaders to make a grand offer of help on behalf of their communities in exchange for a reciprocal commitment from the state. Is anything happening in this area? Is anything concrete going on now in relation to that?
Well, I know that report, Danny's report, has landed really quite well, and I know it's certainly seized the attention of the faith minister and others. I don't know exactly whether all of those recommendations are going to be picked up or not, but I certainly agree with Danny's. One of Danny's central findings is that there does need to be there needs to be a lot more comfort and understanding between faith communities, particularly at local level, and both local government and national government. And this idea of levelling up and using and partnering, I think that's the key word, is partnering with faith communities to achieve that, is something which I think has found some. Let's just say that that seed has fallen on fertile soil, and I think will hopefully produce a lovely crop. But the report, as you rightly say, Danny's report goes into other areas, so I can't speak for where that's going to go. But it's a good report. I'd encourage people to read it, and I think it dovetails neatly into the work that I'm doing as well.
As a journalist who covers religious affairs, one of the things that I often hear from faith groups is that when it comes to government and also journalists, it's very difficult to understand any faith simply from the outside or just by analyzing a set of doctrines or beliefs, because faith is so much part of someone's identity and is as a powerful motivator to do things, to do good in many respects. But do you think the government and the civil service gets it wrong when it comes to faith because they just don't have enough people inside who understand religion from the inside? It's so much looking from outside rather than actually understanding what is going on, because there's just not enough people who understand it.
I think it's perfectly true to say that government could do a lot of things better. And I think one of the reasons why this review was commissioned was precisely because I think they feel that this is an area that they could do better in. I think there are good people working very hard to try their best. I don't believe this. There are some people that have this crazy conspiracy that, you know, government is full of, you know, sort of almost, you know, evangelical secularists that want to sort of shut faith down. I think there may be one or two people like that, but I think on the whole, most people just don't understand faith. So it's your question really, that actually they get a bit squeamish about it. And I think one of the challenges that I come up against quite often, just being very candid, is I think you see some people who say, I find it I don't understand it, so I want to be neutral, and they think that by ignoring faith, that somehow that is a neutral response. When I would argue, no, ignoring faith is the opposite of neutral. You're actually actively shutting people of faith out. I don't get the sense that you know, the majority of public servants, I think, are really decent, hardworking, wonderful people. I think the lack of faith literacy within the civil service is a big question. And I think giving people the tools and the confidence to understand faith and to work alongside people of faith and places of worship and faith in general, I think is something that is really long overdue. I would say that you know, there may well be, Christopher, a recommendation in my review to encourage more faith literacy, or maybe even insist on it for government workers. I think it would be helpful for journalists as well, if I may say. And perhaps you could spread the word amongst your colleagues. Faith literacy is important.
I know that the Foreign Office for a while had a number of seminars and heard from people about religion, the importance of religion, but perhaps it needs to be far more widespread. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. Look, you know, Dame Louise Casey's written a number of reports, and she is a poster person for I think the kind of review that I'm doing. She's a marvelous person. She often talks about, you know, faith being sort of treated just like saris and samosas. You know, it's kind of people go along and they get told the basics of like maybe Hinduism or Sikhism or Judaism. You know, you're told, you know, Muslims don't eat pork, and you know, Hindus don't eat beef, and Sikhs are vegetarian, and that kind of, it's a sort of really at superficial, you know, grossly superficial level. And I think that you know, I think we need to get a bit more granular than that. I'll give you an example. If a senior civil servant is charged with either enacting legislation or writing guidance notes around government legislation, and they don't know the difference between, you know, what it is to be a Sikh and what it is to be a Hindu, then that's frankly unacceptable. You know, we need to make sure that that level of literacy goes a lot further than just, you know, the very, very basics. And that way, I hope we will have a, you know, a happier, more settled society. And I think it just makes for good government if government know, and government officials know, about the people that they're serving.
Obviously, the UK is a multi-faith, pluralistic society. In that, you know, traditionally the relationship of church and state was mediated through the Church of England. We've got the Church of England bishops in the House of Lords. Many of them seem to be in conflict with his government. Do you think that there's a possibility of seeing different faith representatives in the House of Lords, for example. I know that there was an attempt at one point to make the late Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor appear. But do you think that's something that could be considered, given that the current makeup of the House of Lords?
I think, and I'm not an expert in the upper house's constitutional complexities. I do think that there is something specific about Roman Catholic archbishops going into the House of Lords, which
it didn't work.
I'll come back to you on. But I think in general, the Church of England and the Lords Spiritual do a tremendous job, not just speaking up for their own faith, or particularly the Church of England. They do, I think, a very good job speaking up for people of faith. And, they do it in a very, I think, a very generous way as well. But then if you look at the makeup of the House of Lords, you do have lots of senior members of the British Sikh community, the British Hindu community, the British Jewish community, the British Muslim community, and other Christian denominations as well. And so I don't think, as a whole, the House of Lords is lacking people who are there because of their contribution to faith and the promotion of, the support of faith. In terms of making the Lords spiritual more than just Church of England, it's way beyond my brief, Christopher. But I would, I'm a fan of the upper house. I'm a fan of the Lord Spiritual. I do think that, and I always applaud it when, senior members of other faith communities get into the House of Lords, and long may it continue.
Okay, we'll pass the message on to the faith leaders. There's an opportunity here. Now, certainly now open to questions. Please do write your questions in the chat box. I would like, though, to ask you just to come into some concrete issues around the government and faith. We've seen these problems of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party. We've seen allegations of Islamophobia even leveled at the Prime Minister. I mean, what's your response to this rather more serious situation? It's not just religious ignorance here. It seems to be something a bit more deep-seated. What is your response to these allegations?
Well, look, the issues of anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Semitism, or any kind of prejudice is, of course, reprehensible and not something which anyone should tolerate. My review, when I was setting out the terms of reference for it and I was going through it, I specifically left out anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred and FGM and a few other bits and pieces, specifically because I think government are taking it so seriously that they either have or are in the process of appointing other reviewers to specifically look at those issues. So whilst I acknowledge, look, it's those are terrible things that have happened and terrible accusations have been made. It doesn't form part of my review, and I just hope that when the different working groups and the different reviewers get to the bottom of it, that the right way forward will be found. I don't want to live in a society where anyone in public life is accused of any kind of prejudice against people of faith. I think it would be totally against my values, and certainly the values that I see from so many members of the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat and other parties. It's just not, it's just not cricket, Christopher. It's not how it should be. So, let those reviews and those working groups finish their work, and let's hope that, justice happens, well, whatever that looks like.
Okay, thank you. So we've got some questions coming through now. Michael Wakelin asks, isn't one of the big problems that there is no recognised national curriculum in schools regarding religious education?
Well, it could be. RE does form part of my call for evidence. The call for evidence closes it's all online. I hope you've all got access to it, promoting it amongst people, but that closes on the 10th of December, and there is a section on there on religious education. So, you know, if what's behind the question is a desire that my review looks into it and makes recommendations, the answer is yes, we are looking into it, and there will be recommendations. Beyond that, I do the very fact that I think it is an area that needs to be considered as part of the review will tell Michael just how seriously I view it.
Okay. Ruth Peacock asks, what about anti-Sikh hatred being given the same prominence? It's a story of a Sikh schoolboy attacked yesterday. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I saw that. You know, a horrible attack. I didn't actually see the video. I know about the story. Look, whether this boy was picked on because he was a Sikh, whether he was picked on because he, you know, had different color skin to the people that attacked him, I don't know enough about the story, about what actually happened. But yes, of course, any kind of attack which is based on religion, skin color, or any other protected characteristic, you know, is to be utterly condemned. Of course, it is. Within the, you know, I think, you know, what we are seeing, I think, within schools, I think sometimes there does need to be greater celebration of other people's faiths and cultures, and we see a little bit of it. And some schools are better than others. You know, I think that. I think we could see more, but in that particular case, you know, it could have been for a whole host of reasons why he was attacked. I think looking at the religious hatred aspect of it.
Another question from Ruth about the group Faith Action, who seem to have been quite close to government work recently, and maybe recipient of some government funds. Can you explain a bit about why Faith Action is seen as important, or why they're being
Yeah, I can't, unfortunately. Nothing to do with me. I know that Faith Action have got a contract with the department for providing some services to do with faith. I haven't studied the contract. I probably would have done if I'd have been in the office a bit more often, but because of lockdown, I haven't. But it's a good question, Ruth. I'll look into it. I think they sit. So Daniel Singleton, who is I think he's their managing director or chief exec. He sits on the faith task force, and they, I think, have a representative function for like the Jains and Buddhists and a lot of these much much smaller faith communities, which I think they you know, that they work alongside. I don't know much more than that, but Ruth, if you want, write into the department, and I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll give you a much fuller and more comprehensive response than I've been able to.
And Andrew Brown asks whether or not humanism should be taught as part of RE, given that most people in England, the default position is a kind of non-sectarian humanism. So should humanism be part of the RE curriculum?
I think that humanists and all other beliefs need to be taught and need to be understood alongside greater faith literacy. You know, I think the humanists do some tremendous work, and I think, you know, Andrew Copson, who I like personally very much indeed, he and I spoke last week. I've been encouraging the humanists to fill in the call for evidence online and to participate in that, which they have done. Hundreds and hundreds have, and I think, you know, that's very, very welcome. They have a voice that needs to be heard, and certainly, you know, the values and the beliefs of humanists need to be taught as well. You know, I'm a small L liberal, Christopher. You know, I think people should believe what they want to believe as long as it doesn't harm other people. And I think, you know, you're free to, you know, humanists should be free to participate in public life in the way that they do. And they do, you know, I've been around Whitehall for long enough to know how loud their voice can be, and I welcome it very much. So, but let's not confuse faith and belief, because, you know, my review is very specifically looking at faith and human, and to, you see, to have a, my understanding of the difference in language is important. And if you go on to the call for evidence, you'll see I've put down some definitions, some helpful definitions, which I think explain the difference between religion, faith, and belief. And its most simplest way, I can put it like this: to have a faith, you need to have a belief, but to have a belief, you don't need to have a faith. And so I'm you know, I welcome people of all beliefs and all faiths and all religions and no faith and even no belief, if people exist like that, to fill in the call for evidence. But you know, I'm personally very clear about the difference between what is a religion, what is faith, and what is belief. And I wish government understood it better too.
Yes, I suppose, you know, when you see that the humanists are there at, for example, Remembrance Sunday, representing, I suppose, as they should, a part of civic society, but perhaps what you're saying is they shouldn't necessarily be under the faith and belief banner.
No, don't misunderstand me. They should be under the faith and belief banner because they have beliefs. They shouldn't be under the faith banner. I think Andrew Cox would be very angry if
yeah.
and his humanist colleagues would be very angry if they were put under the faith banner. But they definitely have beliefs. They're welcome to their beliefs, as I'm, you know, welcome to mine, you're welcome to yours. But faith and belief are different.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for that. I also, on this review, I wanted to ask you. It says it will be looking at anything that is harmful within religion. Can you explain a bit more about that? What that will be looking at specifically?
So the review is in you know, 4 sections. The first is asking the question: is faith a positive thing for society? You know, are people of faith places of worship? Do they make a contribution? The second is, how does government engage? How well does government engage? Could government engage better with faith communities? The third is identifying harms that are done within religious communities. And the fourth is just my recommendations, which will be probably about 20 recommendations, I think. So the area of harm, I don't want the area of harms to be occluded, or sorry, to occlude the first column, which makes the case that you know, that people of faith can make a positive contribution to society. But that isn't to say that harm isn't done through religious practice, and that does need to be looked at. And I suppose you know, if I would not be a successful reviewer, my report would not be an honest report if I didn't acknowledge that within every faith community there are the occasional 600-pound gorilla in the room that which we need to address. Now, if I do my review properly, I will probably end up making everybody upset a little bit, and every faith community and every government department upset a little bit. But hopefully, you know, I will also, you know, not that I'm looking to win friends, but I think I'll also make them happy as well in some of the other things that I've written. So yes, there are harms that are done through religious practice, and I think if the government see my recommendations and respond to them well, then we can hopefully have fewer victims of these things. I'll give you an example. There are, in some religious communities, and very, very few, but still some, you know, the most incredible financial coercion and some really despicable things about how you know, it's all to do with money and power in some cases. And there are some real victims at the end of this, people who have had their life savings gone. You know, I mean, they are victims of crime under the auspices of you know, a place of worship or faith. And I think that you know, that needs to be addressed along with a handful of other things, whether it's religious-based nationalism or faith-based nationalism, or coercion of any kind, whether that's in marriage or relationships. I think we need to make sure that is called out. And whilst it's not the biggest chapter in my review, it's certainly going to be there.
Okay, thank you. Could you share with us a little bit about your own faith and your own background in that respect? What faith tradition are you part of?
So, I mean, I don't particularly crave a public profile. I've only just started on Twitter, and then my Twitter account will be closed down again as soon as this review is over. But I was born into a Jewish family, a Jewish family with no faith at all, really. So we weren't brought up. I guess you could say we were at best agnostic, encouraged to be agnostic. No, but I came to a Christian conviction in my late teens, early 20s, and hence, as you said at the beginning, I work for the Conservative Christian Fellowship and others. I've always been fascinated by the role of faith, and so yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't particularly like the label Christian either, if I'm honest. Just amongst friends, I prefer the term follower of Jesus, because it makes it much more real. But nevertheless, my review is, I'm coming at it very independently, very open-minded. I have tremendous support from men and women of different faiths and different backgrounds, helping me, and I'm a champion for faith. And as I said earlier, I'm also a small L liberal. I think people should be free to practice or not to practice, change their faith if that's what they want. I'm a champion for freedom of religion or belief, just to get the belief thing in. I consider it an enormous privilege to have the role that I've got. And hopefully I'll discharge my duties faithfully.
Okay, thank you. A question from Ben Rich, who has asked about RE teaching, and saying that community schools that don't have RE specialists often turn to outside faith groups for for religion teaching, and he says that sometimes can lead to proselytizing, which it could be inappropriate and potentially damaging. Is this an issue that you're aware of, and is the government prepared to tackle?
I'm aware of it. Again, in the call for evidence, I would definitely encourage people to fill that in if that's an area that they've got concerns about. The area of RE in schools and chaplaincy in general, I would say, does need to be looked at. And I'm sure already, I mean, we've had lots and lots of responses, like thousands of responses to the call for evidence. We need more. Can I just say, actually, a bit of a plug on the call for evidence? We do need more women responding. It's something which and we are taking steps to ensure that we are specifically targeting more women. But I'm just in the very, very light analysis that I've been able to do. We are, we're just modestly underrepresented, and I want to make sure that it's as fair as attractive to women filling it in as not. I think some of the reason for that might be that within some communities there is a sort of a patrician element from some of the leaders, who will fill it in on behalf of everybody, and therefore certain voices won't get heard. And I think that's it. Probably across all faith communities would be guilty of that to a greater or lesser degree. So yes, more women, if we can get it filling in the form, that would be terrific.
Okay, we'll certainly try and spread the word on that. Just to follow up on Ben's question, Stephen Patterson here is asking, perhaps there are some kinds of faith practice that should not be allowed within this context of RE education, I presume. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, I mean, let me study the evidence first. But of course, there are practices, whether they're faith-based or not, that shouldn't be allowed. I mean, I'm in 21st century UK. There are certain things we shouldn't tolerate, and I think the review won't be comprehensive. It won't cover everything. But I mean, if you just take the example that I gave earlier, where there is some evidence across different faiths of really aggressive financial coercion and mismanagement, that shouldn't be tolerated. We should clamp down on that, as well as some of the other practices. But you'll forgive me for not getting drawn too much into some of it, because it's the that's at the spicier end of where the review is. But what I really want is for the review to be held in balance. Yes, that is part of the review, but there's also a big part of the review about how government can modulate its behavior and change to engage with faith communities differently and hopefully better.
Yeah. Now this call for evidence is online, is that right? Because Michael Wakelin's asking, how do we contribute to the survey and the call for evidence?
So you can do one of two things. You can go to www.gov.uk and then just type in, there's a big search bar at the top, and you just type in call for evidence faith review or that kind of thing, and it will be the first or the second thing that will turn up. And then you click on that. There's a privacy notice you have to read, and then you go through. The other way, which is possibly quicker for those of you on social media, will just go to my Twitter account, which is at Colin Bloom, all one word, Colin Bloom. And then I think one of the first tweets I ever made, there's a link that will take you directly to it. So for those people who are on Twitter, that would be the way forward. I have to tell you though, I despise Twitter. I think it's a sewer. But I recognise its value.
Okay, I've got another question here from Stephen Patterson. If your faith is really strong and you really want to protect your children from corruption, why should people stop you? God and faith is more important than social conformity, surely. Otherwise, it's just an opinion and lifestyle choice. That is not how many people, and that's not how many people see their real commitments. They feel compelled and constrained, not just like they're making consumer choices. Faith is a really strong category beyond just opinion and choice.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there's some reasonable criticism can be made of all governments, past and present, in thinking that faith is for many people an option, like going to the pub or a nightclub or the gym. For many people it is an essential part of their life, and I think that that might make interesting reading when the review comes out. That actually these for many people, going to a place of worship is not an option like going to a restaurant or going to anything else. And but that said, one of the things that has come out of the last 9 months, I think, has been a tremendous and a really wonderful transformation in how adaptive places of worship have been, in going online, using Zoom, doing what we're doing now, TikTok or whatever. I don't know all of the platforms that have been used, but I know that there's been almost a renaissance in how faith can be encouraged, and people's interest in faith, I think, has gone up significantly during this time. So but yeah, I get was it Stephen's point? I get Stephen's point. I understand it, and I'm sure he'll be one of the first to be reading my review with great enthusiasm.
Well, we're all really looking forward to reading this review, and want to thank you so much for all the input you've given to this session, and to really helping us understand what it's going to be all about. Just a few couple of trivial questions before I go. First, inside number 10, what is the view on faith? We saw that Boris had his son baptized in Westminster Cathedral. Does this mean a return of the Prime Minister to the Catholic faith? Or what's the view inside number 10 on this question?
So number 10 not only put together the terms of reference for this review, they number 10 was absolutely instrumental in making sure that that this review happened. And whether it's the Secretary of State Robert Jenrick, or the Prime Minister, or any of the ministers that are across government working on this, the generosity that they have shown me personally has been really remarkable. And I think there's a lot of goodwill that this review lands well. As far as the general view of faith in number 10, I don't think it's a million miles away from where I'm at. It's kind of small L liberal. People should believe what they want to believe, change their beliefs if that's what they want to do, and should be free to share their beliefs with others in a healthy way. They just don't like coercion, and who does? So, we are. I think you'd be hard pressed to say that the Prime Minister was a born again, Bible believing, spirit led, devil kicking follower of Jesus or any other kind of religion. He wouldn't say that himself, but he would firmly defend other people's right to believe what they wanted to believe. And I think it's really refreshing that we have a Prime Minister and a leadership which embrace all faiths and none so warmly.
But he's not.
I saw Scorcher snort at my little comment there. I hope I wasn't being too cheeky.
But he's not going to do a Tony Blair and go back to being a Catholic or become a Catholic.
Well, why not? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll ask him next time I see him. But why not? He might find that really, really helpful. But ask him, Christopher.
Okay.
Get him on the show.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Colin, so much for your time and for taking on these questions. And I'm going to hand over now to Ruth to wrap it up. And we really appreciate you spending this afternoon explaining this very important review to us. Thank you very much.